We need a new renaissance, here and now.
Every economic system in the history of the world has been born, has developed, and then has passed away.
He was so popular that when Roosevelt ran for his second term, he said, I want this guy to be my vice president. Mostly big city mayor types didn't want Wallace, they wanted Truman, a tool of the local political machine.
Public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
So many reasons why you should retain cash. It's offensive that the politicians believe that they have a right to all of your information at all times.
102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing.
We actually have an economic emergency. The recovery's really been at the top. For most Americans, it's a struggle, and the jobs that have come back are low-wage, part-time, temporary jobs.
What will it take to get millions more people actively involved in working on identifying, creating, and implementing solutions every day starting now? Real solutions do exist. I've talked about them a lot.
We have a jobs emergency, and we have a climate emergency. We can only fix them together.
It's all one whole, one universe, one consciousness.
We need to stop dividing ourselves into these teams and find out, how we really connect, and stop listening to the news, stop watching television, and getting off of social media and having conversations with each other again.
We need a new renaissance, something for the heart and the mind.
We need to be talking to each other.
Why do we need a new renaissance? Well, I think it's really about enlightenment, individually as well as a whole, coming together. On this Earth planet, we've experienced in recent years a pandemic, concerns about World War III and nuclear war, economic and environmental, as well as social injustice issues, psychological crises. All of this put together could be called spiritual crisis. That being said, first let's take a look at a historical perspective to get a better understanding of what enlightenment should be in the present.
The first industrial revolution lasted from the mid-18th century to about 1830, and it was mostly confined to Britain. Pioneers, as they were called, came to the continental United States and basically took land away from the indigenous populations. There was definitely genocide. There was the slavery of African people in order to accelerate the economic boom of the first industrial revolution. The second industrial revolution took place approximately from 1870 to 1914. Railroads were the initial spark for the second industrial revolution, and when people found out that they could charge other people to ride the train, local cities began to connect their railroads. Before the development of elaborate transportation systems, economies were often localized and based off the barter system.
The gift economy is the ways that we meet each other's needs without mediating that through money. So everything used to be a gift economy. A lot of people think that before money there was barter, which is kind of how you do a money economy when you don't have money. But it really was, historically, you didn't have that much barter. You had people living in villages, living in tribes, taking care of each other. Today, there's very little, especially in our country, there's very little gift economy left. We pay for things that even our grandparents didn't pay for. Things like recreation, entertainment.
That's true.
People used to sing. The old farmhouses where I live in Pennsylvania, they had a piano room, People would get together, and even when I was a kid, there wasn't really a lot of daycare. If your parents were both working, the neighbors would look out for you. You'd be outside. So gift economy refers to a lot more than, it's not necessarily just giving presents to people.
Yes.
But really, what sacred economics is about, gift economy is only one of the concepts, because, I'm not talking about abolishing money, but I'm also, maybe in some parts of life, yes. It is about reclaiming some parts of life from money, but it's also about infusing money with properties of the gift. So that gets into nuts and bolts economics. In a gift economy, you don't hoard. Wealth does not come through having. Wealth comes status. Wealth comes through generosity, how much you give. Because the more you give, the more people want to give to you too. But money is kind of the opposite. The more you have, the more you control, the wealthier you are. So I investigate things like that. How could we change the nature of money through the banking system, through the way that it's created, in order for wealth to return to what it was originally?
In the 1920s, the stock market was booming. There was a lot of fraudulent activity, no regulation basically of the stocks being traded on the market. Eventually, there was a crash in 1929 that was followed by the largest economic depression in the history of the United States so far, and it had a great impact, of course, all around the world.
What was the New Deal that was proposed by President Franklin Roosevelt to Congress?
The government is called in to fix things, rules, laws, regulations. In the 1930s, we had terrible unemployment. 1933, official unemployment rate, 25%. And the president who was elected, Roosevelt, in 1932, came in as a kind of centrist Democrat. But then within a year, this president really changed. And by 1933, listen to what this man did. He went on radio, there was no television, and he said, I'm going to create Social Security. Big smile. I'm giving everybody who's 65 years of age or older a check every month for the rest of their lives. Wow. I thought there was no money, the American people said. No, he said, don't worry about it. And no sooner was he done with that speech, he stood up, he gave another speech. And he declared the beginning of unemployment compensation. We'd never had Social Security in America before. We never had unemployment compensation. Those were created in the depths of a depression. He went on the radio and he said, I'm going to give every unemployed man and woman a check every week for a couple of years, just to make it kind of easier for you. It's not your fault. Wow, there were tens of millions of unemployed people. He was now going to give a check to the old ones, 65 and older, and he was going to give a check to all the unemployed, but he wasn't done. Within a few weeks, he went on the radio and he said, I got another plan. It strikes me, he said, as unfair to have millions of Americans, all they want to do is have a job, work, go out to work every day, and the private corporations of this country won't provide them with jobs. It seems to me the only reasonable thing for me to do is the government should provide them with jobs. Between 1934 and 1941, he created and filled 15 million jobs. The stunning reality of American politics today is not that we're not doing that. The achievement of American politics is no one even discusses it. It's as if we've had a kind of attack of national amnesia. Well, you might be wondering, and you should, about where in the world Roosevelt got the money for Social Security, unemployment, and paying salaries to those millions of people he hired. And I'm going to tell you now, you're not going to believe it because you live in a different time. He taxed corporations and the rich.
So how did we get the New Deal in the first place?
What made it happen was pressure from below. First, something called the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO. In the 1930s, we had the greatest union organizing drive in the history of the United States. We never had anything like that before, and we've never had anything like that since. Millions of Americans who had never been in a trade union got together, joined the unions, because they believed it was their best chance to survive the worst depression capitalism had ever seen. Millions joined. We also had a powerful Communist Party, and we had two powerful socialist parties. And the Communist parties and the Socialist parties and the CIO, led at that time by the mine workers leader, John L. Lewis, worked together. And they went to Mr. Roosevelt as president, very politely, And they said, look, Mr. Roosevelt, we got these millions and millions of people that we've organized as union, socialist, communist, all that. And you got to do something for us. Because those of us that are unionists are telling you we're suffering terribly and no one's helping us. And those communists over there, they keep saying that if something doesn't happen, then we're going to do in America what those people over in Russia did, and that's scary. And they said that to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt was an astute politician. He knew they meant it because he could see what was going on. They had the millions of people. So he convened a meeting of rich people and corporations. You know, he comes from that background personally. His family is an elite family. And he told them, he basically said to them, look, I got to do something for the mass of people. It's going to cost an enormous amount of money. You're going to give it to me. Because if you don't, you're going to lose it all. So you better give me some, because that's your only hope. Look every day in the street. You see those communists marching down, talking about Russia? Do you want to lose it all? He split them. He didn't win them all over, not by a long shot. He split the corporate leaders, and he split the rich. Half went with him, and half formed the Republican Party backbone. Okay? But the half was enough, so he could get those things through. But he demanded something in exchange from the unions, the communists, and the socialists. And the majority of all those groups agreed. I'm going to give you the best help for the mass of people you could imagine. Social Security, unemployment, what I went through with you. But you've got to stop talking revolutionary babble. I don't want to hear that anymore. We're not going to do that. Not in Russia. Blah, blah. Stop all that. If you shut that down, I'll give you Social Security. I'll give you jobs. I'll give you what you want. That deal was struck. That deal was done. The masses got a program. What's the lesson here? 2 lessons. 1, you want a different outcome to a period of economic hard times, you got to build organizations from below. You count on the political structure, you will get exactly nothing. Okay? That's first lesson. But even more important is the second lesson. If you don't, here we go now, change the organization of the enterprise, if you don't radically alter the capitalist enterprise, everything you do can and will be undone. See, what happened was you left in place the heads of all the corporations. You left in place the organization of the major shareholders, the board of directors, the whole apparatus. You left them in place. Which meant you left in place the people, the boards of directors and major shareholders, with every incentive to evade these rules and regulations.
As the global depression raged on in the 1930s, the Nazis came to power in Germany under the leadership of appointed Chancellor Adolf Hitler, following a series of electoral victories that gave him supreme authority. Their propaganda campaigns were very effective with the economic circumstances at the time, and they dominated the National Socialist Party. During the course of the war, millions of people deemed inferior were executed. Allied forces consisting of military from Europe, the US, and the Soviet Union defeated the German army when they entered the Soviet Union in the 1940s. And of course, most of us know Adolf Hitler is reported to have committed suicide. Many believe that World War II ended with dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. However, top American military leaders were quite clear that the atomic bomb was unnecessary and that Japan was on the verge of surrender. Admiral William Leahy, Truman's chief of staff, is even quoted as having said, "The use of this barbarous weapon was of no material assistance in our war against Japan."
Henry Wallace was probably the only vice president of the United States who people thought of as a radical and a socialist.
Yeah.
He was the vice president under Franklin Roosevelt.
The next to the last term, right.
And then he had been a farmer in Iowa. Mm-hmm. He was an editor of a farmer's newspaper. He was an agronomist and an economist about agriculture. And Franklin Roosevelt appointed him at first to be Secretary of Agriculture. And he did such a great job, and he was part of sort of the left wing of the New Deal.
Extraordinarily popular.
Yes, he
with
was one of the
farmers and all that.
Yes, he was one of the most popular
Yeah.
figures in America. Then he became more radical, even more radical. And a lot of the more mainstream Democrats said to Franklin Roosevelt in 1944, you really should get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
And so he did. He
Yeah.
made him the Secretary of Commerce, but he didn't give him any power. And so he replaced him with a little-known, ineffectual senator from Missouri named Harry Truman.
Yeah. How did that come about? And didn't that transition happen at the Democratic
It
Convention?
came about at the 1944 Democratic Party convention, where the more moderate, middle-of-the-road, mostly big city mayor types didn't want Wallace. They wanted Truman, who had been kind of a hack politician in St. Louis, in Missouri, kind of a tool of the local political machine called the Prendergast machine.
Yeah.
And so when they allowed Wallace to disappear and they brought in Harry Truman.
Didn't they do that over the course of the convention?
Yeah, they did, yeah. And people thought that Wallace might have been able to win if it came to a vote, but they maneuvered it. And Roosevelt kind of was passive about it. He didn't want to cause any controversy.
Right. And he was not well at the time.
Right. And so in 1948, after being frustrated by Truman not being progressive enough, Wallace ran for president on the Progressive Party ticket, a third party ticket. When he first announced, people thought, oh, he could do pretty well because he's a popular figure. But he got red baited. People said he was a communist or was sympathetic to communism. And he had some very radical ideas. He believed in racial integration. He was pro-union. He believed that we should end the Cold War with the Soviet Union and find ways of mutual cooperation.
And that's considered radical.
Which was very radical back then during the Cold War. And so at the end of the day, he got 2% of the vote. And he disappeared from history and from history books. And so hardly anybody's ever heard of Henry Wallace. But for a number of years in the 30s and 40s, he was among the most famous public figures in America, widely revered. His books were well read, and he was an influential figure in the New Deal.
And really in the history of our country.
Yes, absolutely. But today, invisible.
After World War II, in the 1950s, you heard the term lifting of the boats. In the United States, it's no surprise that there would be a booming economy. And for about 20 years, there was, because after World War II, the three main areas of economic growth had been Western Europe, Japan, and the United States. And of course, Western Europe and Japan had been dramatically impacted by World War II, whereas the United States had not, except for Pearl Harbor. There actually had been no battle fought. So it was easy for the industry to continue and to have a booming period. So for 20 years, that was happening here in the United States. The middle class had grown significantly. Cost of living was low. People could afford houses and cars and good education, etc. Vacations. But the 1950s also had a downside. The military-industrial complex was building up. Eventually it would be 800 bases all around the world by the time we got to the 21st century. And all kinds of regime change wars, all in the name of democracy. Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex.
From the President's office in the White House in Washington, D.C., we present an address by the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
In holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
While the country was beginning its 20-year boom, Senator Joseph McCarthy made history demonizing communists and socialists, the beginning of censorship.
He has in his law firm a young man named Fisher, who has been for a number of years a member of an organization which was named, years and years ago, as the legal bulwark of the Communist Party. I want to say, Mr. Welch, that it has been labeled long before he became a member, as early as 1944.
Senator, may we not drop this? I did you, I think, no personal injury, Mr. Cole.
No, sir.
And if I did, I beg your pardon. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last?
Did you know that Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham book was banned in China from 1965 until Dr. Seuss's death in 1991 for portraying early Marxism? Jack London's Call of the Wild was banned in Italy, Yugoslavia, and was burned by the Nazis in the 20s and 30s because it represents socialist ideas and it's considered too radical. Dr. Seuss's Yertle the Turtle was banned in British Columbia, Canada as recent as 2012 following a 2011 ruling that political materials must be kept out of British Columbia schoolrooms. John Steinbeck's classic The Grapes of Wrath is among top 100 books banned in America. Here's a short passage. There is a crime here that goes beyond denunciation. There is a sorrow here that weeping cannot symbolize. There is a failure here that topples all our successes. The fertile earth, the straight tree rows, the sturdy trunks, and the ripe fruit, and the children dying of hunger must die because a profit cannot be taken from an orange, and coroners must fill in the certificates died of malnutrition because the food must rot if not sold at a profit. And in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage.
Back in the 1950s, when you walked into a kid's bedroom, what did you see? Books, books, books basically everywhere. So what just happened? Well, back then, we had parents that nourished ingenuity. And now we have parents who nourish enough time for them to do whatever they want. Who cares about these kids? Your lives aren't affected by theirs. So that's what a lot of people's mindsets are right now, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have books anymore. Another reason why is innovation. For the first time ever, innovation is doing something bad, and that is making people dumber. What do I mean by making people dumber? Well, our new technologies like video games and other stuff like that has decreased the need for forms of entertainment that are educational, like books. Back then, they had nothing else to do, so, well, you got a big stack of books, why don't you read them? Now, we don't need books anymore because we don't have all these other forms of entertainment. Have you ever seen anybody who has become a very successful person because when he was a kid, he only played one thing, and that was video games? Usually, the successful people are the people who read books a lot. So we want to make sure that humans are as smart as can be for the far future. We need to bring books back now.
Yeah! When I can't make it to the movies, what more than the spoken word? Photographs with some captions. From the unusual to the absurd. I'd like to read a book, write a song that has a hook, travel to exotic places. I want to read a book, but there's always a story to find, subject matter of any kind. Not just look at the pictures. I want to read a book.
The Third Industrial Revolution began in the 1970s in the 20th century through partial automation using memory, programmable controls, and computers. Since the introduction of these technologies, we are now able to automate an entire production process without human assistance. The digital revolution is the shift from mechanical and analog electronic technologies from the Industrial Revolution towards digital electronics, which began in the latter half of the 20th century with the adoption and the proliferation of digital computers and also the internet. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is the current and developing environment in which disruptive technologies and trends such as the Internet of Things, robotics, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, AI, are changing the way modern people live and work. The concept of the Fourth Industrial Revolution was coined in 2016 by Klaus Schwab, a the founder of the World Economic Forum.
That people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
What have we learned from history? There's a lot more that could be covered, obviously. There are many great books to read. Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States is one. Director Oliver Stone's documentary, The Untold History of the United States, is another great source. In Chapter 2 of this series, I talked a little bit about FDR's New Deal. The Banking Act of 1933-34, or Glass-Steagall, was also a part of that ongoing process. It was implemented as a regulation of Wall Street stock trading as well as banning certain risky behaviors with the purpose of preventing a repeat of that catastrophic series of events. It was eviscerated by Congress over time with the final nail put into it to completely repeal it in 1998. Obviously, there was another stock market crash and economic downturn in 2007 and 2008. If you want to learn more about that debacle, you can check out my documentaries Roots of Society and the Enlightenment of Solutions, as well as The 99% Movement and Occupy Wall Street. Wall Street definitely needs some enlightenment. It should be noted that Senator Joseph McCarthy in the Senate hearings from the 1950s never actually proved anything about nefarious or authoritarian infiltration into the U.S. government. In fact, his opportunism, misrepresentations, and mischaracterizations were exposed by legendary journalist Edward R. Murrow. That being said, censorship and what he is known for is still prevalent in our culture. Decades later, there is still a limited focus on certain political views as only being authoritarian or even totalitarian, while ignoring or marginalizing enlightened figures such as Eugene Victor Debs or FDR's Vice President Henry Wallace, only two examples. One of the most revered, well-read critics of capitalism, Karl Marx, has been demonized with limited perspectives about his entire life's work. It depends on what one chooses to focus on. For instance, some people may be shocked about what ancient Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle felt about man-made economic ideas such as markets. No person should ever be put on some kind of pedestal. As I always say, I don't agree with anyone 100%, not even myself, because I'm always learning. I do feel that it's important to always have an open mind, heart, and soul. The author of the First Amendment definitely had some enlightened ideas when it comes to freedom of speech, for example. Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and the late great Daniel Ellsberg are great examples of advocacy for free speech. Then there is what President Dwight Eisenhower coined the military-industrial complex, with a history of regime change wars created in numerous places around the globe since the 1950s, the creation of over 800 military bases, and an annual budget that's almost $1 trillion now. There are major concerns about World War III and a nuclear war in the 21st century. Enlightenment is needed in the U.S. now. Real peacemakers in our world, past and present, are enlightened individuals. Don't be fooled by those who are trying to rewrite history. Gift economy did precede barter, and barter preceded money. Mutual aid projects are great ways to help each other out and create exchanges between individuals and in communities. These are examples of enlightenment. In the next chapter, we'll go into more detail about the fourth and fifth industrial revolutions. We'll look at basic necessities, environmental and economic ideas in a new renaissance. We'll look at thoughtful ways of community living. We'll look at psychological concerns in society, and even enlightenment in music, the arts, conversation, healthy lifestyles, and spiritual awakening. Each and every one of us is a part of this. We also need to have some fun and enjoy each other's company. Let's focus on complete enlightenment, individually and together. Now, let's talk. This is Dan, Nowman, Nice Wander.